Welcome back to The Real Build. I'm Jamila, your host, and this show talks about all the layers of housing, building, construction, interest rates. It's not just about buying and selling. We're peeling back the curtains and learning about everything. And we're looking at everything about building, developing, mortgages, all of that, how you buy houses. It has become quite complicated these days. So we're going to peel back a topic every Tuesday. And today, we're going to talk about interest rates. Now, I've got my good friend, Andre Burlack, who here with me. We've done some projects together. He owns Great A&A Properties and is an investor and developer of residential product here in the Okanagan. Andre.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Amazing.
Tell me a little bit about your history and why we want to listen to you talk about interest rates today.
Yeah, it's a riveting topic. So a brief history, I started my work career in Vancouver. I worked for a private equity fund there, and we did kind of commercial and residential projects across Western Canada. After working there for a few years, I moved back to our wonderful city of Kelowna, and I started my own kind of investment and development business. And at that point is when I met Jamila, and we worked together on a fourplex, and that continued into kind of a larger scale multifamily building, and now we've got a few more projects on the go.
And you have been managing the budget for a 28-unit condo building.
That's right.
Over the last 3 years.
Yes.
Of course, and the interest rate to borrowing that money to put that project together.
Yeah, there's been ups and downs.
Yes. So I wanted you here today so we can really dive into interest rates, why they freak us out, what they're there for, all of the above.
Let's do it.
And so really, we got to roll back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to roll back, I would say, to the 80s.
Sure. Wow, that's a good place to start.
We got to talk about some embedded mindsets we have around interest rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's kind of three significant moments in time in the last 50 years.
Yep.
That our parents, our grandparents talk about their experience in that, which created either opportunity or fear.
Yeah.
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 So we're going to roll back to the 80s, and essentially we're going to talk about how lending really got onto Superdrive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about that.
So back in the 80s, and it's crazy that we're talking about the 80s so much today, but back then is kind of when it all started, when people went from buying houses, properties with just cash to being able to finance their purchase. So if you didn't have the money needed to purchase your home outright, you could go over to your bank, you could apply for a mortgage, which is when that term kind of became popular, and you could essentially make payments over 20, 30, 40 years, and that would kind of make it so that you could live on a budget. So you could spend X amount on your house every single month and not have to have that huge amount of capital up front to purchase your home.
Yeah, so we're talking 50s, 60s, 70s, early 80s. People were just buying houses with cash.
Yes.
$6,000 for a home. I worked for a builder that told me one time they could buy lots for $6,000 and build a house for $30,000, brand new, in Lake Country, in the Okanagan.
Wow.
Yeah, this is later than the 80s, but brand new cars were $1,000, and people would save their money, and if they wanted brand new or if they wanted a used car, they would go and the cash would go across the table, and then all of a sudden, the banks went, we could make some money here.
There's a chance to make some money for sure.
Yeah. And so they started, and I'm going to assume that prices started getting more for things, and the attainable of new things became a little less possible. And the economy went, well, how do we make this more possible? And the bank said, well, we can loan these people the money. They can pay it back to us over the next 20 years. We'll charge them this fee.
Exactly. The interest rate.
This interest rate. And everyone's happy.
That's right.
Right. So then everyone bought.
Yeah.
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 You give people the ability to buy things.
Yep. That's right.
And they buy things.
Yeah.
And everyone bought like crazy.
Yes.
And so supply and demand, AKA control the economy. If everyone's spending this kind of money, we can make more. And then we have this big interest hike of the 80s that we hear so much about. 18%, 20% on your mortgages. Your mortgages that were $20,000, $30,000. Let's keep that. That is relative too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
However, just like today in the 80s, people, were overextended. They started walking away from their properties, and some people swooped in as the opportunity. I've met people in the 80s. They bought a lot of property in the 80s.
Yeah.
They were able to come in, take over these mortgages. They didn't even have to apply. They just assumed the mortgage. They had these houses. They plunked renters into them, and they're multimillionaires today.
Yes.
But a lot of other people that weren't able to get the means to pay those mortgages, that had to walk away from them, are now have this fear based around interest rates and real estate, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a hike in the 80s where it went up to those huge rates that you were talking about, that you had, families that used to live on a single income. Now you had to have two people working just to kind of afford that mortgage.
Yeah.
And so you had this huge shift where, it kind of screwed with the supply and demand. Everything kind of stagnated. A lot of stuff got built before, but then in that 80s period, not a lot of product got moved around just because of those crazy rates.
And we hear people talk today about like printing money.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially this is what was going on.
Yeah.
They were given the A-OK to loan out money that didn't exist on a paper note for an interest rate that came back over 20 years.
Yeah, going off the gold standard definitely aided in that being able to happen.
Yeah. And if I was running a bank in the 80s, I'd be like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah,
right?
Why not?
Smart business decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But, worked out for some, didn't work out for others. I think that's really important to note that in all scenarios, there is also opportunity if you have the means to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And there are people that end up losing too, which is a catch-22 there, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from mindset.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And how you're viewing what's going on, what you're thinking about what's going on.
Yeah.
And, this show, we want to talk about traditional mindsets as we talk about construction and development and building in all our different episodes, and investor mindsets, which is very different because, like I said, in every scenario, there are opportunities to win and opportunities to lose, depending on how you're looking at it.
Yeah, you just have to plan ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the 80s happened. So this is our first significant interest rate
Event
that made world news,
mm-hmm.
that has stuck in the news, that is stuck in our brains.
Stuck in a lot of people's brains even today.
Yeah. And then we fast forward.
Okay.
And I would say that 2008 is the next significant.
Yeah. 2008 was definitely a significant event.
Yeah. And there was a lot of lead up to what happened to that, with the way banks were lending and really how the U.S. was lending, right? Not necessarily Canada.
Yeah, it was mostly the U.S. And the main issue that you saw in 2008 was that there was very little verification that went on to giving people these mortgages.
Yeah. So like in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So,
like in the 80s, nothing had changed. There was no catastrophic collapse like we saw in 08 in the 80s. And so there was really no reason to bring in more regulations. The banks obviously didn't want more regulations because that would just hinder them from being able to write up these mortgages and make that interest rate on those. And so there was really no incentives to change the system.
So like you're in the 80s and we talk about how, dad would go in, make a handshake with his banker, and he'd come out with a loan note and you'd buy a house. Literally.
That continued for like 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, women couldn't go in. Let's point that out. But that's a whole nother show.
Yeah, I think
so. But yes, dad could go in, chat with his banker, sign a note, come out, buy a house and support his family and pay his bills. And everyone wanted to do it.
Everybody wanted to do it.
So coming up, we are going to dive right into 2008. We're going to talk about the lead up, about what happened there, the thought process behind it, the opportunities, where people lost. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
From the Lower Mission to Lakeview Heights.
This is AM 1150. News, talk, sports.
Welcome back to The Real Build. I'm Jamila, your host, and this show talks about all the layers of housing, building, construction, interest rates. It's not just about buying and selling. We're peeling back the curtains and learning about everything. And today's show, we're diving into interest rates. And we've been talking about where the mindset comes from interest rates first. We're digging deep into the past. Yeah, we spent the last segment talking about the 80s and the interest rate spike and the mindset around it, what happened there. And the next significant moment in time in the last 50 years was what happened in 2008. Now, I've got my friend Andre Burlack here with me. He is a real estate investor and developer and has spent a lot of time running the numbers and watching interest rates calculate on him on his own investments. So I wanted him to come in today and talk about the real deal about interest rates. So if we're going to talk about 2008, we need to go back a bit, right? So really, and a lot of what we need to talk about is how they were lending in the States, not even in Canada,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
We just followed suit.
Yeah, in Canada, in Canada, most of you guys know, you're stuck on a term. So even if your amortization period, like the period which takes you to fully pay off that house or that property, even if that's 25, 30 years, every 5 years in Canada, you have to essentially renew your mortgage.
And for anyone listening that's never done the mortgage process, the amortization is the length of lending time, which for a lot of your friends or parents could be 25, 30, 35 years, has all been available recently. And then your term is how long you've locked in your price or your interest rate security with the bank.
That's right.
Which a lot of the times is 5 years or 3 years, just to kind of clarify that.
Yes.
So
having that term in Canada kind of saved us a little bit from the 2008 crisis in a way, because people couldn't you'd always have to think 5 years at a time. You couldn't just say, okay, I'm going to lock in this rate for the next 30 years and forget about it. We had a bit stricter regulatory policies than in the States.
Right. And in the States,
there's very little verification, very little kind of incentive to verify any of these rates.
you get a mortgage.
That's right.
Get a mortgage.
That's right.
You get a mortgage.
That's exactly right.
I've
Yeah.
watched some Netflix specials where they had people submitted their dog's name on an application and got a mortgage.
Yeah. So there's very little incentive from the banks to verify those rates, because that paper note, that promise for you to pay the bank back, would get traded around and put into different financial systems and different products, where it would essentially, it wouldn't really mean anything to the banks. And so they had zero incentive to verify you, because they're just kind of making that little coupon rate off of you. So,
And they were lending like crazy.
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And the future looked prosperous for the banks.
Well, so many people were buying homes
Yeah.
that it kept on bumping the prices up. So it looked like a deal that was too good to be true. You could buy a house, you could get a mortgage, and in 6 months, that house would be 10, 15% more valuable than where you bought it at.
And a lot of people are willing to do things based on what the foreseen consequence would be. And
Yes.
if you, in Canada, didn't pay your mortgage, you would end up in bankruptcy. There'd be 8 years of climbing out of that hole. In America, they had jingle mail, is what they called it. And you put your keys in an envelope and you mailed it back to the bank and you walked away from the house.
Yeah.
There was the banks just took the house. There was really no personal consequences. So, of course, let's get a mortgage for me and my dog.
Yeah. As many as you could.
Now, the bank was doing so well on these, they were like, well, let's invest people's money into these mortgages.
Exactly.
They're going to pay out like crazy.
Yeah. There's different financial products that came about, all tied to kind of the real estate industry in the U.S. And I mean, that's kind of what led this to be a global phenomenon, not just a U.S. phenomenon, is because so many pension funds, so many different investors from all across the world were dumping so much money into these various products. And when people stopped paying their mortgages because they had adjustable rates, or they just ran out of funds, or they over-levered themselves, everything came crashing down.
And not paying was not something they put in the business plan of these mortgages.
No, nobody thought people wouldn't pay their mortgage.
No.
Because since the dawn of mortgages, people paid their mortgage.
Yeah. Well, other than the 80s.
Other than the 80s, but...
You put too much pressure on everyone,
Yeah.
they will walk away.
Exactly.
And so we've got everyone buying mortgages, and they're giving them to anyone. And then you've got the banks investing people's money into this mortgage fund that is going like crazy. And this is 2005, 2006, 2007.
The whole lead up, yeah.
And then 2008 happens. And it feels like it happened overnight.
Yeah.
But essentially, these first mortgages came up for renewal.
Yeah.
And of course, they had a spicy interest rate for their first term.
Yeah.
Right? To
Yeah, they
get
had
you
a
in.
nice teaser rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then the real more interest rate kicks in, which is honestly in the paperwork, right?
Yeah. Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like people could have done the math and prepared a bit for this.
And the banks could have verified that, these people that they're loaning to could actually support not just the teaser rate, but the, future rate that it'll get adjusted to.
And that really kicks up to why we have a stress test now, which we will come to.
Precisely.
But so teaser rate, sales over, real rate kicks in. Nobody's prepared for this. Jingle mail. Here's my keys.
Yep.
See you later. In droves.
Yes.
Like hundreds of thousands.
Tons of empty homes, lots of delinquencies on the mortgages.
Yeah. Yeah.
And prices on real estate just started to fall because there's so much supply and very little demand because people had run out of money.
Well, and the stock market crashed.
Yeah.
The investments crashed.
It was all tied together, right?
Everyone's money was invested in these mortgages, so that crashed. So that's kind of what went on there, right? And as human beings, we do go through things and we make decisions, and then there's consequences and stuff happens, and then we try to learn from them and change things in the future.
Yeah.
Which can be seemed like adding more red tape to things. Again, much easier to get a mortgage in the early 2000s than it is right now.
Yeah.
Still not impossible.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell kids that you can't buy houses. You absolutely can buy houses. But this is kind of, again, the mindset. This is what your parents have been through, your grandparents have been through. And when you turn to them and you ask them for advice on purchasing or going out and get a mortgage, these experiences that they've had in these times influence how they're giving you advice right now. And it could be for good, or it actually could be for bad, depending on how you're buying a home right now, right? So 08 crash happens. Now, this is actually when I started investing in real estate, was right after this time. And I did a couple of real estate investment, like weekend seminars, those Rich Dad, Poor Dad, come on out. A lot of people think you're a sucker if you go to them, but I learned
that was a great book.
So much in this experience. And one of the big things I learned was they gave me a link to Fannie Mae website in the States. This was after 08. This would have been in 09 or 2010. And Fannie Mae is like the United States CMHC. And there was a link that said delinquent properties, because the banks don't want to hold property. They want to sell it off, get as much money as they can, get back in as they can get.
They're not real estate investors, that's for sure.
No. And you click on this link, and there was hundreds of thousands of pages of homes that they would sell to you right there on the spot. $7,000, $15,000, $20,000. They were just trying to get as much money back into the bank as possible. And this is where feast or famine, right? Mm-hmm. So these homes were being given away because people walked away from them.
Yes.
However, the United States was on sale.
Yes.
It was all on sale.
It was all on sale.
And it was pretty crazy. And there's a lot of people that made money and a lot of people that sat back thought it was terrible, and lost.
Yeah.
So coming up next, we are going to dive into the third significant period of time that has interest rates on everyone's mind. This is the years of COVID. Very recent, very painful.
Yes.
And we're going to tell you more about that next.
From Pandosy Village to Prospera Place.
This is AM 1150.
News, talk, sports.
Online at am1150.ca.
Welcome back to The Real Build. This is Jamila. We are peeling back the real estate industry. We're not just talking about buying and selling on this show. We're talking about how you build things, how you develop things, how you finance things, and all of the above. Every show will have a new topic that we'll dive deep into, and today we're talking about interest rates. Now, if you've been paying attention, we talked about three significant moments in time in the last 50 years that have interest rates have been involved in a historical manner, where it has influenced people's thinking, influenced people's mindset, and influenced people's buying decisions around housing. So we talked about the 80s. Everyone's heard about the 80s. Parents, probably grandparents now have talked about what's happened to them in the 80s. We just finished talking about 08 and the effects of loaning out too much money at a good deal and how that turned around into people walking away from a lot of their homes, mostly in the U.S. There was some side effects of that in Canada, but mostly this all happened in the U.S. And the fact that they had invested a lot of people's money into these mortgages is how it really rippled effect around the world. Now, I want to get into the COVID era because that is a very significant time of interest rates. And I realize right now we're probably feeling a bit of the pain in the industry around interest rates, but like COVID was really kind of where the next significant thing happened.
Absolutely.
But before we get there, so 08 happens and we trickle through into 2020, COVID, right? And over that time, people weren't spending. They were trying to get people to spend. They were slowly reducing interest rates.
At the start of COVID, yeah.
Well, no.
Before.
But after 08.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So 2009.
Yeah.
I still can't figure out how to say 20-something. 2010, 2011, they were slowly bringing interest rates down.
Yeah. Yeah. It was relatively stable times, right? We had modest growth across real estate. Transactions were happening. Nothing crazy was happening. There was other sectors, like the energy sector was going crazy, but in terms of real estate, it was relatively stable.
Yeah. I started buying houses, rental properties at that time, and I remember being really excited about like a 6.4% interest rate or a 5.7.
Yeah.
Lock that in for 5 years.
The world was bouncing back from 2008, and it was a good time to buy. Everything was stable, and it was on an upwards trajectory. So you could make very good, solid decisions and investments that way.
And to be honest, those are my favorite markets, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's old and crappy, it sells for an old and crappy price, and someone comes in, sees the opportunity, puts some elbow grease into it, makes some equity on that, right? If it's brand new, it's the cost of creating it. So that's the price it is,
That's
right? So everything has relative good value. You're seeing, a 3 to 6% inflation rate. And inflation rate's really important to remember in real estate because essentially that's what the value of your property is going up based on inflation. And you have time to make decisions.
Yeah.
When you're buying, you can actually go visit a house and look at
Not
it.
a crazy seller's market, yeah.
Yeah, and not a crazy buyer's market, too.
No.
You could put something up for sale, and within, 90 days, it would be sold. And that's a really nice balanced market. And that kept around for a while.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah. And I know, you're either really sick of hearing the word COVID or you're not, or most of you are. But it's a segment of time now, and everyone went home, and it was ridiculous. It was crazy. I don't know how we'll describe it in the future, but everyone went home. Tumbleweeds were going down the streets. No one knew what was going to happen, especially in the housing market.
Yes.
You couldn't go and view someone's home. You couldn't, no one was buying. No money was moving. That's really bad for the economy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So with kind of the whole shutdown that happened, obviously there was a fear, I think, from the government, from the banks, kind of from everyone, that the economy would just grind to a halt. Nobody's transacting on anything. Nobody's buying goods. And so that's kind of when we started to see the rates start to drop right after the COVID news was announced.
Yeah.
And that essentially, everyone was throwing around the word of like free money. And some of us got CERB checks, and that's kind of what it felt like. But there was a
Boxing Day on money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a huge influx of cash to everyday people.
Right.
And very
And
low
time.
rates. Yeah.
And lots of time.
And lots of time. People had time on their hands, and the rates were very low. So you saw mortgages, especially in Canada, drop to historic lows. And so people could afford homes or apartments or condos that before they couldn't. And people wanted a change, and they were looking to move.
And so the bank had low rates. They wanted to stimulate spending, because if we stop spending, essentially the economy stops moving, right? So they put it on sale, but they were a little smarter this time, right? I mean, it was painful, but they were smarter.
Yeah,
They put in the stress test.
Yeah, they put in the stress test. I mean, that came in like after 2008, because I think that was one of the main lessons learned, is like, hey, we have to verify these people that are getting mortgages, because you can't have, your neighbor and his dog getting mortgages anymore.
But they actually said, hey, listen, we're going to give money to you for cheap, but we're going to test you at a higher interest rate.
Exactly.
Because we're loaning this money to you for 25 years, and we need to know in 5 years from now, we're not going to crash the economy like that happened in the United States. We learned a little something.
That's right.
That you're going to be able to qualify. So as much as that stress test rate was annoying to people, they're like, I can afford this right now. Why are they charging me so much money, right? But it was to protect you and our economy.
Yep.
Against.
They were looking into the future.
Yeah.
It was a good thing that they had the stress test, obviously, because we saw what happened with interest rates after COVID with the huge spike, and we'll get into that. But having that stress test there meant that even though we're seeing pains today, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about what's going on now in the next segment. But so we get into COVID, and money's free.
Yep.
Money's
basically
cheap. They're giving it away, and people are buying everything.
Yes.
Cars, boats, yoga mirrors,
toilet
home
paper,
gyms. And now I can't fit all of this stuff in my house. And now I'm stuck in my house with my family. I need 3 more bedrooms in this house. And thanks to Amazon, people could get anything they wanted.
That's right.
Anything they wanted.
Yeah.
And you're buying, businesses are making money. I remember when you couldn't get dumbbells.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't go out and buy dumbbells.
Weighted vests was another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
No.
Anyway, so to protect our spending, obviously the economy's fine.
Yeah.
They gave away enough free money.
Yeah.
Now it's time to get that interest rate to start coming up. Right?
Yeah, and so we saw, between 2021 and about 2023, those historically low interest rates. Mm-hmm. And then you started to hear about the inflation aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the first trigger that rates started their rise. They needed to go up in order to counteract kind of the increased price on everything. And so why the increase of price? So because in COVID we had the lockdown regulations and restrictions, we could physically build less stuff. Mm-hmm. But because people had free and cheap money, we could buy more stuff as a society. And so you created this difference, which just made prices shoot up in value.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand, exactly.
Yeah.
And so because of this difference, you started to see the price of everything go up, and that is deemed as inflation. So as those inflation numbers kept creeping up, the Bank of Canada, the Fed down in the U.S., they started to raise rates kind of taking spending money away from people so
Mm-hmm.
that they would bring that demand down and tamper that demand
Mm-hmm.
so that prices would no longer keep on skyrocketing.
But we were a tough economy. We wouldn't listen too quickly.
No.
Hey? They had to really climb those rates.
Yeah, they really climbed those rates.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, that really sums up, what happened in COVID. Next, we are going to talk about what's going on right now, which is only a couple years out of it. And we now have these higher rates. And we're going to talk about how these rate announcements happen, what's kind of going on with these rates right now in Canada, how it's affecting the buying market, and a little tips from us, our own strategies that we're doing as developers and builders with these rates right now.
From the sails to the trestles.
This is Kelowna's AM 1150.
News, talk, sports.
Welcome back to The Real Build. This is Jamila. We're peeling back the curtains of the real estate world from building, development, and buying and financing. Every show will have a new topic, and we will dive deep into the history, why we think, why we should think. And today, we have been talking about interest rates. I've got my great friend and colleague, Andrew Berlacu, here talking about interest rates. He has spent his own time funding projects and managing costs of loaning money himself on a big scale. And we just wanted to dive into the history of this because we know people out there right now are maybe a bit scared to make a move because of interest rates. And hopefully this can help you understand why.
Yeah, there's been a lot of changes recently, so
Yeah.
it's
So
understandable.
I mean, in the last 50 years, there's 3 significant moments in time that has stood in people's brains that influence their mindset around interest rates. One being the 80s that we've talked about earlier. The second one being 08, the crash of 08. And the third one really being COVID, when they were giving money away. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll say that the actual significant moment in time in history is right now and not necessarily.
Yeah, maybe.
Not COVID. But we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about how your mindset around this today can either help you see opportunities or maybe be scared of opportunities that are in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have just had 2 rate announcements
Yep.
that are in our favor.
In the right direction.
In the
I
right
guess.
direction. The
Yeah.
2 we're going to remember that happened this year.
Yeah.
But there's 8 rate announcements every year.
Yes.
Right. So to be not buying until the next rate announcement, like the Bank of Canada has the ability to move economy in any direction at any time in any year span.
Yeah.
So to really not buy because of interest rates is definitely a mindset that's holding you back from opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially that's definitely the case now because we've seen, the rates start to be cut. We got 25 basis points earlier this year. We just had 25 basis points in July. And so we see this downward trend. Inflation isn't on the top of everyone's minds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as prevalent as it was before. So the economy is kind of tapering down.
And
which
we're all feeling it.
we're all feeling it, right?
Yeah.
Like there's less spending money to go around, definitely. And so the Bank of Canada has reacted to that and they've started to cut rates.
Mm-hmm.
And many banks and many financial advisors would argue that, we're going to continue to see these rate cuts back to kind of a sustainable level because our economy, the way that our financial institutions work, a high rate environment like this isn't ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been talking to mortgage brokers and I've been reading, everyone's speculating, and it is all just speculation from knowledgeable individuals in the industry that have watched trends and markets and know it's all judged on inflation and watching what's happening there. But a lot of them, if not all of them, are really saying that we'll start seeing decreases through the next 3 years, where we kind of level out
Most likely, yeah.
somewhere around that 3% rate. And as long as the economy keeps going in a nice progressional inflation rate, that is probably the trend.
Yeah, most likely.
So it's 2009,
Yeah.
2010.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's kind of the feeling that we're getting now is, okay, we are at the bottom, as some would say. And now we're starting to dig ourselves out of this interest rate hole and this lack of capital hole that we've been seeing. And, you've got investment funds and different people coming back to the market and starting to purchase again,
Yeah.
which is a great sign.
Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, in 2009, 2010, I made a lot of money. I built up a really good real estate bank in that time when the economy was just going and sales were just going at a nice pace.
Mm-hmm.
This is back to the time we love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're definitely on the track to see that again.
Yeah. And so right now, it really is an extreme buyer's market.
Yeah. Huge amounts of inventory and very little people buying.
Yeah. And even I would say there isn't huge amounts of inventory. There's inventory. There's a natural level of inventory out there. There is no buyers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is a crazy thing to say. We sit in a sales center. We have product for sale. We are talking to real estate agents. We're sitting on inventory right now. And literally, you can roll tumbleweeds down our sales center all winter long. The buyers disappeared. So we're looking for a whole new pool of buyers right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of opportunity.
Definitely. As a buyer right now, if you have the means to do so, you have a great amount of opportunity just to ride down the rates, because if history's told us anything, is that the price of real estate, the price of assets goes up as interest rates go down.
Yeah. I mean, so you have today's buying price.
Yep.
You have sellers with inventory that they do want to sell.
Motivated sellers.
Sellers. And let's really rewind. When we talked about the 80s, there was people that lost, people that saw the opportunity.
Yep.
They went out, they bought, they're multimillionaires today. Now, I went out and bought after 2008, and those rental properties have done quite well for me. That turned out to be a smart decision instead of investing in RSPs and so on. And now, working in the industry, being a developer, being a builder in today's market, when everyone was buying, it was really hard to make a project make sense.
Yeah.
Right? Prices of land was just going and going. We didn't buy anything.
No. During the crazy COVID low rates, when prices were going crazy, no.
Yeah. So, and a lot of people were buying homes, and that was really good. But when it comes to the industry people that are really tracking interest rates and values and running, numbers on projects and making sure that you're not going to lose everything to interest rate along the way.
Yeah.
Right. That you can actually make a little bit of money and create housing. Those people weren't really buying in that time. Those people, though, are out buying now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good time to, if you are wanting an investment property, wanting something to have a long-term rental income, for example. It's a good starter for a lot of people looking to invest in real estate. Now is a really good time to purchase that, because you will see appreciation if these rate cuts continue, and more buyers are now able to be qualified and join the market again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a supply and demand metric again. As rates come down, more buyers can be qualified, more people are more likely to buy new homes or, sell their existing home and buy other homes. And so the kind of the volume and the transactions in the market goes up.
And I think one thing was when everything was going crazy a couple years ago, people were buying, you could buy a lot with your money, right? And you can't buy as much now with your money. So, let's rephrase that. You can buy a house, but maybe not a brand new house.
Right.
Right. And so maybe you don't buy the forever home right now. Maybe that's something you need to move out of out of the thought process. Maybe you're buying the next 5-year home.
Yeah.
That, gets some paint. Pull up TikTok and those DIYs. Paint it.
Yeah.
Put a new toilet in it. You can Google how to do that on YouTube, right?
Yeah, that's how we've all started, kind of.
Maybe you have to put a little bit of work and elbow grease into it, which is always some of the best return on investment.
Yeah, that stuff is always worth it.
Yeah, but figuring out how and what works and how much money you have and what's out there for you, I would say would be a really important step right now in today's market. And, I wish we could keep talking for another hour about this because, buying and selling homes, it's one of the biggest purchases you ever make in your entire life. And on the flip side, if you do invest in real estate, it can be one of the greatest returns of using other people's money to make money.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I think if we can wrap this up today, we learn what history is telling us about interest rates. You can focus on the tragedy in that, or you can focus in the opportunity in that. Make good choices. We'll talk to you next week.